Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Natalie Luna Rose, and I am the Communications and Outreach Manager for the Arizona Center for Disability Law, and also a partner with my DD partners here. So today's session, we sent out a survey last week, and we asked, and boy, did you answer. We had, I want to say, more than 400 responses. And then I'm sure I'm missing that number, but it was truly amazing to have that much response. It's obviously an issue that's near and dear to all of it, every single one of us, whether it affects us directly or not in terms of caregiving, or if you are a person with a disability. So thank you and it was quick responses too, right after we sent out the link. And it pretty much kept that for a while. So again, thank you. So the purpose of the survey was obviously to take the temperature, quote unquote, no pun intended, of how are you feeling? How's the community feeling about Arizona reopening? We're seeing what's going on just, in our daily life every day. We're also seeing what is in the media, and it's a challenge. It's a challenge for there's a lot of emotions and tied up with this whole thing, whether no matter what side of the political spectrum you're on. So what we'd like to do with this information is share it with other state officials. So that way they're just not hearing it, via, secondhand or some post they saw on social media, that they're actually getting real information from real people who are living this day to day. So I think now we should probably start with the 3 questions. We're gonna have, okay. So if you can fill this 3 short questions, if you can take the poll, and we'll go over it in just a minute. I will read the first question. How comfortable are you returning to your daily routine outside of the home? Second question, of the following choices, which action do you think is the most important in making you feel safer? And the last question is, what would help you feel safer? So if you can just, again, take a moment to answer those questions.
And the poll is anonymous, so yeah.
Okay, I'm seeing numbers come in now, so just a few more minutes here. I'm sorry for the questions that appeared. Minor technical difficulties. Okay. I'm going to give it another 30 seconds, and if you haven't filled it out, well, I think we could end the poll. Okay, so I think if we're okay with it, I will end the poll now. Okay, great. So we can review the results. So let's go with number 1. How comfortable are you returning to your daily routine outside of the home? 0% extremely comfortable. We've got 13% comfortable, 13% neither comfortable or uncomfortable, uncomfortable at 43, extremely uncomfortable at 30. My routine never changed at 2%. Of the following choices, number 2, of the following choices, which action do you think is the most important in making you feel safer? 6%, I don't have any concerns. Going into businesses while COVID-19 cases, deaths are still increasing at 22%. Places I visit are not disinfected properly at 2%. Availability of disinfecting materials at 11%. Childcare for family members, friends at 0%. People not adhering to social distancing protocols, 28%. Public health regulations not followed, like government or CDC at 24%. Personal protective equipment, PPE, not available at 7%. Mandatory symptom checks required at 0%. And lastly, what would help you feel safer? I already feel safe as Arizona reopens at 1% or 2%, excuse me. Established health and safety guidelines are followed at 59%. Regular communication from DDT, Altex providers, and other agencies at 17%. So that still kind of follows the results of what the survey was. So thank you for taking the time to do that. And I do believe now I will be heading it off to Miss Erica McFadden.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to talk to you today about the survey that we completed and what we found, and hopefully will help you and the things that you're doing in your life and also with the organizations you work with. I do want to mention that I know that ASU Morrison Institute and the Republic also had a poll, and I spoke with the director over there to see if there's a way to compare what they did with what we did. And their questions were different, so we couldn't compare this time around. But so hopefully today it will give you some more insight as to what we can do moving forward. And the hope is, you know, as I share with you some of these results, that we can have a conversation afterwards to figure out what else do we need to know and what can we do moving forward, understanding what these issues are. So why don't we go to the first slide? And I'm just going to briefly share with you all kind of what we did. First of all, this was miraculously done. I just want to thank the team, especially John McDermott and IHD folks who have helped us whip this thing out and put it out there for public. It was only out for 4 days, and we got 299 responses. The over 400 that Natalie was referring to was because that there were some people who tried to take the survey, but they weren't eligible to take the survey. The survey was targeted to people that either have disabilities that require supports to their family members or to organizations that provide services to people with developmental disabilities. So it's a very limited group, but it's a group that we very rarely hear from, and we really wanted to know how this pandemic was impacting them. So we only had it out for 4 days. It was out between May 14th to May 18th. And so we looked at, if you look at the groups, most of the people who did the survey were family caregivers. We had 17% of people with disabilities taking the survey. The hope is that we could keep leaving it open, and as we leave it open, we'll get more responses. But right now, our margin of error is roughly around plus or minus 6 percentage points. And we're hoping it can grow so that we have more of a sample size to be able to compare groups. But I just want to let you know that we sliced and diced the survey in different ways to see if there was any differences in responses based on the groups. And that's how we have it divided like this. The people who answered the survey, the majority, 81% of people with disabilities that answered the survey lived with their families. 10% lived in group homes and 5% were in child and adult developmental homes. And a few also, just a note, a few were living on their own, but they had to move back into their family's home due to COVID. So I thought that was an interesting response. And do know too that we asked people what kind of services that they either gave as professionals or what kind of services that they used. And it was across the board. Most of the services people received were therapies, attendant care, rehabilitation, and other respite services. So let's move on to the next slide. So this is the key question that everybody wants to know is, how's everybody feeling? I mean, we know what we read in the paper. So it's kind of like what you answered. You know, you all said 73% of you were at least extremely or uncomfortable with returning to your routine outside the home. Among this group, it was 70% of family members reported around the same result. Overall, though, there was a 65% of the sample reported discomfort with returning to everyday routines. What was interesting about this is that people with disabilities had a different response. So if you look here, 55% of people with disabilities reported uncomfortable. Now, it's still the majority of the respondents, but it's lower than any other group, which would be opposite of what we, counterintuitive to what we would think. And also, what's interesting to note is that 21% of people with disabilities, you know, neither felt uncomfortable or comfortable with returning to their routine. So they were just kind of neutral. And then 8% reported that the routine never changed. Now, the reason why that's significant is because, go to the next slide, Jeff, please. So if you look at it, this kind of helps explain the difference. So we asked people before COVID took over, you know, how often that they had to go out, interact with people that were more than 10 people in a setting outside the home. And so most people, you know, this is the often response. So you see the majority of people said that they often have to do that. So of course, more people are concerned about what happens with social distancing. But if you look at people with disabilities, the response was only 38% of them were interacting outside the home with more than 10 people. Again, that was counterintuitive to me. I don't know about you guys, but when we looked at some of the responses, we found that many people were homebound anyway, or they were staying at home because, you know, they just didn't have any other options. And so the COVID pandemic happened, and, you know, not much has changed about them going outside their home. So that was an interesting finding. But again, as we get more and more people filling out the survey, that might change. Next question. So then we looked at what the concerns were. And I know you all had mentioned too that one of your biggest concerns was social distancing. Well, our sample also found that overall, 86% of people marked people not maintaining social distance protocols as one of the biggest concerns that they had about returning. And then the second one was growing COVID-19 cases and deaths still increasing was another one that, and this was consistent across all groups of what they were reporting. So that was kind of interesting. And go to the next slide. And they also had mentioned a bunch of other concerns as well. They were mentioning that, I know some of the professionals had mentioned that they could follow the guidelines that are established and keep things as clean and maintain social distancing at their own organizations. But when they send people with disabilities back home, they're unsure if families and individuals are following those guidelines. So it puts the rest of their group at risk. They're also saying across the board, there's people saying that, you know, this is all willy-nilly. You know, people aren't enforcing the guidelines. So some people wear masks, some people do not. You know, some people don't practice social distancing, some people do. And because there's no set requirement for what people have to do, it puts everybody else in danger. And so they were concerned about that. They're also concerned that they were going to be forced to attend, specifically people with disabilities and their families. that they're going to be forced to attend in-person groups or meetings when they're not ready to. So a lot of that was around, a lot of the regulations have been loosened to allow telehealth services to be offered through DDD and Access. People are able to get therapies and things that they weren't before via telemedicine or telehealth through video. They're concerned that when things get a little bit safer, that they're going to be forced prematurely going back into the way things have always been done. So that was something to note too, is as things change over time, how are we going to communicate with our families and individuals about how we're going to keep them safe? Next slide. So then really this all boils down to trust on how individuals feel that organizations are sanitizing, how they're following guidelines, and if there's, you know, and to allay their fears. So what we found out was that 57% of our sample overall thought that the people and groups they knew were following guidelines to keep them safe. So that's good. This is over here, the overall majority. But what was interesting was there was a clear disparity between the groups on how they approach this question. 71% of organizational administrators of disability services said, of course, you know, they're following the guidelines so they can protect their people. So that's expected. What was not expected was on this section, when you look at people with disabilities, only 41% agreed that businesses or caregivers are keeping them safe by following guidelines. But then if you look in the middle, 35% were either neither agreed nor disagreed. They were neutral. This kind of shows me, as an educated guess, that people aren't getting the information. People with disabilities aren't getting the information to understand the links that organizations and caregivers are going through to keep them safe. And so we really need to look at how we're communicating with our individuals with disabilities. Family caregivers also, you know, majority believe that businesses and organizations were keeping them safe, and caregivers. But there's still this orange thing, this neutral, neither disagree or agree, is still something to take into consideration as we look at how we provide information on the steps that have been done. And are we providing information in plain language? That's another important thing. Okay, so the next slide. Okay, this is a very busy slide, but these are some of the things that came up with, you know, what businesses were doing to protect people. Now, what we found was that most disability services, we asked if organizations were open. Those people who said that they're professionals or they're disability service administrators, did they remain open? Or are they planning to open? Most of them have said that they've remained open, but they have modified their direct services to use telehealth, that was with the exception of residential services. Those programs that tended to say that they had closed were day programs, which is no surprise because a lot of those are more congregate settings of larger groups of people. The people who said that they don't plan to open up that they don't plan to open up until either the COVID case counts are going down, the availability of PPE is there, and that they're able to locate disinfectants. So some of these groups that aren't opening have said that they have to look at those things to be able to decide if they're going to reopen. But most of the places are remaining open. And so when we ask them if they've taken any measures to make changes in response to COVID, 96% of those organizations said they already have made changes. So I think that's where it boils down to making sure we communicate those changes to the individuals with disabilities and families who use them. And I think a lot of people are doing that, but there's still some disconnect. Some of the changes that businesses have done have been requiring face masks now and using PPE, and adopting new policies and procedures that follow the CDC guidelines, doing temperature checks, following social distancing guidelines, incorporating travel restrictions for staff so that they won't be allowed to leave the state if they're serving vulnerable clients, limiting group sizes, having more sanitation, more cleaning, more virtual meetings. They also, one businesses have brought up that they're going to stagger their office staff so there's fewer people in the office. And even looking at individualizing services for people with developmental disabilities, so that they go to their home or that they individually provide services, which actually might be a blessing in disguise for some of our groups. They're also looking at disinfecting vehicles, more hand washing, always a good thing. And then what was also interesting was looking at staffing structures. So especially in residential settings, there's an issue, you know, when you look at number of staff coming in and out, a lot of them have incorporated no visitor policies. And so in that same vein, they're also looking at how to restrict the number of staff coming and going. So some places have incorporated, you know, reducing their staff size and then giving more overtime and more incentives so that there's less staff to be able to, you know, to put people at risk. So that's one of the staffing structure changes that people have incorporated. Next slide. Okay, so then we asked people, have you yourself made any changes as a response as Arizona begins to open? What are you going to do? And so what we saw was across the board, as we already knew, you see it's highlighted here, washing hands frequently was the top thing that people said. And it was 92% of the overall sample said that. They all checked that box. They also said social distancing was the second one. 90% of the sample said that. But here is the fascinating thing too about this sample is that, you know, I broke out, we were looking at family caregivers or guardians and people with disabilities. And if you look at the differences, so the hand washing is at 93%, you know, here for family caregivers, 93% of them said that they're going to do that. But among people with disabilities, only 79% of that sample said that they're going to do that. Practicing social distancing, you know, the average was 90%, caregivers said 89%. Among people with disabilities, 77%. And so again, it gets to be a little worrisome to understand if our individuals are really getting the training and education in plain language where they know how to keep themselves and other people safe. For example, if we always say, you have to stay 6 feet away from somebody else. Now, does somebody with an intellectual disability know what 6 feet means? So we have to think about the things that we're putting out there to make sure that, first of all, that they're getting the information. Two, that families are trained on how to get that information to their individuals and how to reinforce it. And then three, what kind of accommodations we can make if they can't do them. Like, for example, some people can't wear masks because they're too sensitive to that, you know, like if they have autism or whatever the disability is. So what other things can be done to make sure that person stays safe? So these are all things that we have to consider. I'm hoping this phone call will help us, or this video call will help us figure that out. And then I just want to mention too that, again, some of the people that in this sample that filled this out were already homebound. So they already said they were doing some of these things and that they weren't leaving anyway, so they didn't really have to do them. So I just wanted you guys to know that. But we all know that if you have people coming and going, especially if they're getting caregivers coming in and out, if they're not doing them, it still puts them at risk. So anyway, that's just a note there. Next slide. And next thing are needs. And also I see your questions are coming in. So we're going to, after I'm done, we're going to go back and do the questions. I just wanted to get through them so make sure that we're not going to answer some of them already through the slides. The next slide was on needs and what resources and practices would help you feel safer. Now, again, we asked you guys this question and it gelled with what everybody else said. The top request that everybody said was following health and safety guidelines, followed by the use of PPE. Now, regular communication from government agencies wasn't as important to people with disabilities. As you see here, it's 42% was regular communication. And they typically, it seems like it was more important to family caregivers and to direct care workers, and other organizational administrators also had similar responses. There was a 20% other response that I think I need to share with you all. And some of the comments that were written in were really interesting. Some of the things that they had said was, I mean, a lot of people were saying that availability of testing is truly key here. Taking temperatures should be constant throughout. One respondent, who was a person with a disability, requested daily check-ins because she was all alone. A place to wait for transportation, for public transportation. to allow for social distancing was a request made by some of our individuals with disabilities. And then one other individual requested daily programs throughout the day because they can't go anywhere, and so, to occupy their time. And then when we looked at what others said, families and professionals, there's a continuous request for to maintain the great things that have come out of this, which is allowing more tele options and continuing some of the extra benefits that have been given. For example, continuing 720 hours of ongoing respite. That was a plus that people saw. The telehealth. They also mentioned helping families to find cleaning supplies, because that was really important, and families are still struggling with that. There also needed to be more communication from some state agencies. I know DDD was mentioned about having quicker and better communication with families on how they can support their young and adult children on how to follow guidelines. Looking at increasing rates, this always comes up when there's a survey. Increasing rates for direct support professionals so that they can continue to serve IDD community, especially in group homes. But there should be stricter requirements around wearing masks and social distancing. And then one thing that came up too was a respondent who had a disability said that she would like to be able to see her family, and she hoped that she would have the ability to Zoom or FaceTime. And I know some others mentioned the ability to get government loaned out equipment or iPads or things like that so they can communicate with their family. And so there are just a few things that came out of the needs that people were asking for. And I know that you probably have some ideas too to help move this along, but and how we can improve life for our people. And I just want to mention too that the behavioral health thing, mental health support for families and individuals also came up. And we don't know how long this is going to go on. We know people are anxious because they don't know. None of us have a crystal ball. And the ability to know what the resources are and options to support our families, to be able to support their individuals, is extremely important. And that did come up consistently throughout this survey. So those are just a few of the key findings. And I know you probably have questions on how do we adapt the survey for individuals. And I have to tell you, we just literally put this out. I mean, we put this survey together in a couple of days. It was only out for 4 days. And so this is a work in progress, but we already have some really good responses. And you all kind of verified some of them already with your polling, because that's exactly what came out of the survey. So I just want to thank you. And I'm going to throw it back to Natalie to be able to answer some of your questions and have a discussion.
Okay, sorry about that. I started talking and I wasn't there, so my apologies. I was there, but not there. Okay, so let's go to the site. So thank you, Erica, for going over the survey, and many thanks to her and John and Nicholas and Jeff and Sarah and everybody else who worked on this. This was did this very quickly and it came out very well. So again, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to start with looking at the questions here. Okay, so a question from Fiona. How accessible was this survey to people with developmental disabilities or other cognitive disabilities who have difficulty with understanding and learning?
So that's a very good question, Fiona. And when we put this out, do know that it's not in plain language, but we knew that in many cases that families would end up doing the survey for the individual as well, because it was so quick. We literally only had it out there for a short amount of time. So we asked if family members were filling it out to try to fill it out from the perspective of the individual. But in the future, if we do put out another survey like this, we do need to adapt it so that all individuals with disabilities can be able to read it. You know, some of the questions like government health regulations and all that, they may not understand. We did look though at what the write-ins were for the people with disabilities that were filling it out to see if there was like a disconnect, if they didn't understand the question, and if they, on their written response, they said something different. And there was nothing in the written responses that conflicted with what they said on the survey. So we did check for that. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Well, yeah, and I think you touched on Erica, but she just went, she also writes, I just wonder how much that population even understands the importance of social distancing, et cetera, and may affect the lower numbers of people with disabilities following the guidelines.
That's a good point. In fact, families even said that on the survey, that they were having a hard time getting their children or adults to be able to understand social distancing, and they were afraid of them returning back to their routines because they didn't know, they weren't sure how to reinforce and how to train them to keep doing it. So that was a big worry among families.
Okay, thank you, Fiona, for your questions. So now from Kin. It is exactly true that members with sensory issues will not tolerate wearing a mask. People in the community may not understand that. If there's a way to bring awareness that some of our members couldn't wear a mask, but it will help that people who comprehend the need of wearing masks do so. We do not want to have our kids with SN be sick, but we cannot keep them at home indefinitely.
Mhm.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Erica.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. And I've actually talked to families that have this issue. Even they're talking about in schools, that also came up too, is people are fearful about going back to school in the fall, what that's going to look like. And if there is some kind of guidance around requiring masks, what about those kids who need to go to school that have IEPs? I mean, what about them? So looking at how can we accommodate those individuals? And I think that's something that we have to do our own research on so we can come up with some answers, or unless other people have found out things that we can do.
I just wanted to make a point to that, is that on some social media that I follow, one of the local reporters here in Tucson at the Arizona Daily Star had said, oh, there's, what is the excuses you've heard? And he posted that, and there was hundreds of, people like, oh, I have to go get my hair cut, I have to do this. And no mention until somebody mentioned, well, what about people with disabilities? And then the conversation changed, and somebody said, oh yeah, my son is, has autism, and we're not letting him out right now because he won't wear a mask. And so I think, we do have to think about how can we educate the public, especially if we have a reporter, and he's a senior reporter too, posting these questions, and everybody's being very glib about it. I think that's something that we should all keep in mind. So from Susan, can you recommend websites or other resources for updated information about COVID-19 in Arizona, and also current recommendations? With the stay-at-home order over, what exactly is recommended?
So I am definitely not an expert on what to recommend for this. I can just tell you what the survey said. I do know, I think that there's a bunch of different sites to collect information. I know, and I don't want to speak for all of you as part of the DE network. I know that the council, we have a site of disability specific resources that are COVID related on our site. Arizona Together also has a site, that's the governor's website, that has a bunch of information and resources. And there's a disability page on there that you can access. I don't know, do you guys have any other ideas for websites or the resources, or maybe people in the chat do? As for what recommendations are, though, I can just say that people should just do what's comfortable for them at this point. I don't think anybody is prepared to say this is what you shall do. The only people who can do that are our health officials and our governor at this point. Somebody have anything to add?
Well, at Arizona Disability Law, our website, we have some blogs concerning COVID and special education, fair housing. So I put our website in the chat box, and we're still working on more outreach materials. So if you have a question concerning that, please let me know.
Just want to jump in and remind people that if they want to ask a question with their own voice, or if they're on the phone, to please use the raise hand function by clicking the participants button at the bottom of the screen and then raise hand at the bottom. If you're on the phone, you can dial *9 when your phone number will jump to the top of our list so we can unmute you and hear your wonderful voices. So just wanted to jump in. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicholas.
Hey, Natalie, too, I was going to mention, I think Lynn Black might be on the phone too. She could probably also provide resources that can help our community, the self-advocates, people with disabilities.
Yeah. Lynn, if you are on the phone and would like to make a comment, we'd be happy to have you on. Oh,
You're unmuted, Nadlin.
she's unmuted.
Okay, thanks. Hi, everybody. How is everyone doing today?
Good. Thank you.
Good.
I was asked to let you guys know about a few things that are out there for the resources for our self-advocates. I was starting to type up a few things which I will post in the chat room, but to make you aware, every Monday and Thursday, there's a national self-advocate group that does a Zoom call. They're called Self-Advocates Resource and Technology Assistance Center, or it's better known as StarTech. And they meet at 10 o'clock in the morning, our time. And it goes for a little over an hour. And they have talked every week regarding COVID. They've talked about having it explained, to our members in more of the plain language. Also, they have put out a booklet, which also DDD now has on the website. So there are resources out there that are more in the plain language that's very helpful. Sorry, I'm losing my voice from the allergies. And another agency that's very active right now is the Autism Society of Greater Phoenix. They are hosting lots of events online also. They're even trying to host a pool party in June in Chandler. So if you know of others who want that, and again, I will post this on the website. We also have our local self-advocacy groups, like People First of Arizona, that host a monthly meeting. The group is also trying to possibly start to make a group called Arizona Self-Advocates Talk. And we're hoping to have that happen within this month, so that it's another resource out there to have advocates kind of hook up and talk about their emotions and to just kind of pass the time with their talents and other things that they like to do. And another group is called Youth Action Council of Arizona, or YACAS, and they also have the monthly meetings. All these groups are on Facebook too, which is really helpful if others know how to use the computer. Let me see, the Down Syndrome Network is also hosting right now their Adult Summit all the month of May. There is a charge though on that. Let's see, John at the ARC has great, along with the plan, the council, lots of the resources that are emailed out on email blasts each week. Also, the Arizona Virtual Youth Leadership Forum is also going to be happening in June, but it's all going to be online this year and not at ASU like it normally is. I'm trying to think what else that I can remember. That's about all I come up with right now.
That's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot. Lynn, thank you so much for chiming in, especially with with your allergies. We appreciate it.
No problem.
So we did have I'm going to go through the chat here. We did have a couple other questions. One was that would a copy of the survey be available? And yes, we will have it on our FAQ. And we can also email it if you would like. Next one, so for those from Karen Wilson, so for those individuals who cannot wear a mask, is it okay for them to return to an employment program?
That's an ACDL question.
I know it is.
Pass it over to you.
I think as long as, you know, you and they feel comfortable about going back to their employment program, and if there's any other, you know, are they adhering to the social, I mean, they're not, these are guidelines and not necessarily laws. So are they adhering to the, you know, social distancing guidelines that are being highly recommended? And if, you know, you feel that it's not, I mean, it's your right to seek, you know, to ask questions. And you can always ask questions here at ACDL or of EEOC. EEOC.gov has a great COVID-19 related webpage concerning employment. I would highly suggest going there.
Just to jump in and try and embody a little bit of what JJ, the head of ACDL, was speaking about last week. In situations like this, he encouraged folks and family members to reach out to the employment program beforehand and communicate your concerns and why you can't wear a mask, and seek reasonable accommodations, some alternative to wearing a mask that would work for both parties. And if communication doesn't yield good results, JJ said, call us at ACDL and we'll see if we can help you from there. So I think that's the kind of advice he would give to that question.
Yeah. Thank you, Nicholas.
Well,
Okay.
I have something to add too.
Yeah, please.
Michelle Stokes and I were talking about this at our monthly Arizona ADA coordinators meeting yesterday. This is Sarah Roof from ADDPC for those on the phone. And we were asking particularly about masks. And in addition to the EEOC document, we were directed to the Pacific ADA network, or the Pacific ADA Center. And they encouraged people to call their hotline, which I will put in the chat right now. This is for the employers or employees who maybe have asked the supervisor or the employer and haven't gotten anywhere, and who maybe are facing some of these complex issues regarding reasonable accommodations, regarding coronavirus and pandemic issues. They offered to talk through everything with them. Now, they did say the Department of Justice has not come out with guidelines about this particular mask wearing issue. So there is a lot of figuring it out as you go along, but they are really good at walking people through this. And so that phone number is in the chat for people if you'd like to follow up. I will find the EEOC guidance document as well, and there is some useful things on there, but it's a little dense. And again, about the mask issue, there's not a lot on their website. So just thought I would share that.
Thank you, Sarah. So all the links will also be put on our Google Docs page as soon as we are done with this call. So going to the next question from Carolyn. Good afternoon. How long will parents be able to do HAB or ATC for their child or children? Our kids are at higher risk, and I feel this was important that we are able to do this. The ability to have ACT makes me safer for my family. Can we do DTS at home? It's hard, and now harder to find a program that we are comfortable with. Thank you.
I would encourage, this is Erica, I would encourage you to to attend, if you can, the DDD town hall meetings. They're having those every Thursday evening from 6 to 8, and talk to the DDD leadership is there. At least now, I think it's weekly, and express your concerns, and they should be able to help guide you, and give you, yeah, it is weekly now, and give you more of a guidance on how long these benefits are going to last and that kind of thing.
Thanks, Erica. From Cameron to Smith, the Commission for Deaf and Hard of Hearing is addressing the issues surrounding the benefit and need for the use of clear masks to citizens who are deaf or hard of hearing with lip reading. We do have some resources listed on our website. The greater challenge is getting service providers to purchase clear masks for their staff. Just a reminder that there's a DDD hosting a town hall this evening from 6 to 8 p.m. And the link is in the chat. From Barb, thank you, Barb. And Lynn's got a lot of, thank you very much. You guys are typing faster than I can scroll. So these are great resources. We will definitely be putting them on our FAQ page. How do we access the Google Docs page? It was in your invite, but and I know I saw Sarah put it up earlier. We'll put it up again, the link to the Google Docs page. And Nicholas just did as well, so thank you for that. From Liz, last week they advised that people with this question speak with Access and or CMS, since the change to parents being able to provide those services for their children came from them, not DDD. DDD is just following their direction. And yes, we've got some really great links. Like I said, we'll put it on our Google Docs page. So is there anything in the survey do you feel that we missed, or what we should have asked, or perhaps maybe asked in a different way? If you can let us know, or if there's any stories that you heard or anything that has resonated since you've taken the survey. We've got a few minutes before I hand this off to John Myers with the ARC. So if you can let us know if there's anything that we missed on the survey, we'd like to know, because we might be surveying you again. Okay, from Liz, what about asking the concerns with care providers, safety and availability?
Yeah, so that's a good question. We didn't ask if people were able to get the services that they needed, including childcare. So that might be something that we can consider asking in the future.
Thinking in-home supports with that question.
Yep. Good question.
And this is from Michelle Stokes. One thing that might help folks is role play of how a person asks for an accommodation for communication.
That's a good point. That'll help show people with intellectual disabilities how to ask.
So Natalie, I just want to highlight something. I think there was a comment earlier about someone making recommendations to the city of Tempe to purchase clear face masks for areas that have walk-up traffic, but they commented that clear face masks can be difficult to find.
Right. Well, thank you for pointing that out. I missed that. And again, thank you for everyone putting up their links on the side. This is great. This is really good information to have. If there aren't any other questions that you feel like we missed, I will turn this over to John Myers.
All right, thank you, Natalie, and good afternoon to everybody. Glad to have you on the call today. I want to start with another poll question. And the question is, do you feel that the state of Arizona is being transparent enough with COVID-19 related information? And when we ask this question, we mean the agencies of the state, be they Department of Economic Security, Division of Developmental Disabilities, Department of Health Services, Access, you name it. Do you feel the state is being transparent enough with the information you need to know about the spread of the pandemic around the state? We'll give you a couple of minutes to answer that question. And we can tell by the responses that are coming in already that there is a pretty sizable majority who feel the answer is no. Got to give you about 45 seconds more to answer the question. And it actually looks like the responses have stopped coming in, so I think we can probably call this one, Jeff. Question, do you feel the state's being transparent enough with COVID-19 related information? 63% of respondents say the answer is no. 17% say yes. 19% are unsure. That would seem to indicate that we feel either information is being withheld or information is not being transmitted, communicated clearly enough. So with that being the case, we'd ask the further question, and we'd ask you to respond either in the chat box or to raise your hand on your phone if you'd like to speak about this. What more could the state be doing? We know that DDD is hosting town halls every Thursday evening. We know that Access and its Office of Individual and Family Affairs is hosting town halls. There may be other outlets for information. What do you feel the state should be doing in addition to or instead of the things it's already doing to help you know what's going on and help you make wise decisions related to the people you are caregivers for? So if you want to respond to that in the chat box, I will turn it back to Natalie, I suppose, to pull those questions, then we'll try to address them.
All right, so back to some of our questions here. Right before we took the poll, and again, thank you, John, and thank you everybody else for answering our poll questions. I'm going to go back to the side here. So from Fiona, just as we were getting ready to take the poll, maybe it'd be good to ask if there's clarity about how agencies will transition back to in-person services. And we agree, so thank you for that. From Liz Carr, Arizona is missing clarity with what information is released. Marianne.
And Natalie, if I could interrupt.
Yes, go ahead.
Sorry, if I could interrupt for just a moment. Liz, I would love to hear more from you. I think actually we would all benefit from hearing more from you about what you think, what you mean by missing clarity, I suppose. Are you, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but are you speaking to issues of, for example, PPE availability, how and when day programs and other services will reopen? Are you talking about when schools and how schools will reopen? What specific things would you feel the state needs to be more clear about? And the reason I ask this is because organizations like mine, organizations like ACDL, the DD Planning Council, we're in communication with state agencies on a pretty frequent basis, and it will help us to address concerns of the IDD community if we know specifically what individuals feel is not being communicated to them or is not being communicated clearly to them. Thanks, Natalie. Sorry to interrupt.
Oh, you're fine. Liz writes, yes, 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 yes.
Okay, we have our list.
Thank you, Liz. So I'm going to go back for Mary Ann. I was able to purchase some of face shields at dollardays.com. So thank you for that information. Sarah Ann writes, be more upfront and honest about the problems. Testing at first and now lack of PPE supplies. Liddy states, the local and state leaders need to be honest, more testing, more PPEs, and sanitizing supplies. Kelly Arnold, we were all sort of left to figure it out ourselves with no clear direction on what to do when this all started. Michelle Stokes, my basis for saying no is that there isn't a coordinated state voice on state information, such as where do group homes get PPE, advertisements or PSAs that send a clear state message to the public, PPE availability, resources for parents and group homes, and agencies all in one place. Carolyn states, I feel we don't know what our options are. Fiona writes, meaning, are people feeling confident that they understand how the agencies they receive services from will transition back to in-person services? Lisa Lawrence, and anybody wants to jump in and feels like they have an answer, please do so. The governor should follow the CDC WHO guidelines and meeting criteria for phased reopening, as well as mandated social distancing and safety practices, so there's consistent clarity for everyone. Shayna Newest, many ask when the extra DDD services will end. As a support coordinator, I cannot answer this for my families. Thank you for letting us know that. Susan writes, I feel like the statistical information available online is not clear. What is the status of the pandemic in Arizona? Clarity on how the government is interpreting the data. It seems like cases and deaths are going up. What are the guidelines for opening up? And then lastly, Liz writes, clarity on what is expected of the public to remain safe, lack of enforcement on precautions, how are DTAs and CBEs safely going to transition back to in-person? What does the school year look like this year? Some kind of timeline from DDD on resuming training.
Natalie, this is Erica. Can I add something?
Please do.
So I think that also came up through the surveys, was this whole communication piece for families from DDD. So we know they have weekly town halls, but if families can't attend those, there is no other option for them to receive services. So DDD has been upping the increase of communication with vendors, which is great, but families still don't get those regular communications. And I think that's part of the issue, is that there's still so many unknowns for these families, and it came out through the survey that even overly communicating is better than not. So it's great that they're doing weekly town halls now, but that doesn't capture all the families that need the information. Also, the families who need them in another language, not only English, but Spanish, that kind of thing. So I think that's just something to consider moving forward, and not to pick on DDD, but other agencies as well. I know Access has their frequently asked questions page, and they communicate with their managed care organizations, but how are we communicating with families that support our students? And same with ADE.
Thank you for that information, Erica. John Myers just posted some CDC guidance for school reopening. There has been some, and I do know this because I saw this morning and I had a discussion, that there's been some sort of, I hate to use the term fake news, but a lot of misinformation on memes. So always try to make sure you're going to the direct source, especially concerning school reopening, since this is the last week of school for most Arizona schools. I do see that Kathy Sweeney Daniel has her hand raised.
Hi, thank you. I'm not sure how to ask this. I'm the mom of a daughter who's lived in an IDLA for almost 15 years, and she's quite medically involved. She's home with us at this time. And something that's been lingering in my head or wondering, because I cannot imagine her going back anytime soon, because she has many staff that come and go to support her and her roommate. And I think I counted 8 different staff. They work in group homes also. They work in DTAs. You know, they have their own families. And it's like, you know, is there a way? I know that COVID's getting out there, and I read a news article about a group home, you know, kind of like the elderly care centers, you know, are getting the infection. And now this article made it seem like it was getting to group homes, which she's not in a group home, but still the staff, you know, work in numerous places. And it terrifies me thinking about, you know, having her go back. And I guess my question is there a way for us to know, and agencies probably wouldn't want to disclose this, but what's going on in their agencies? And as parents, do we have a right to know, you know, what's going on in their agency as far as people being infected?
This is John with the ARC. I can tell you what we know from what DDD has made public, and that is DDD is not publicly releasing the numbers of, or the specific locations of individuals who test positive for COVID-19 in group homes or day program settings. They are making public an aggregate number. As of last week, it was about 71, I believe, individuals around the state. But they have instituted a policy which requires all providers to notify, all providers who operate group home settings and developmental home settings, to notify the families or guardians of every resident who lives in a home where a COVID-19 case has been positively identified, or where a person is under investigation. They used to call it presumptive positive, now they call it a person under investigation. So if there's a suspicion that somebody has COVID-19, or if it's been proven that somebody has COVID-19, the family or guardian of every person living in that home has to be notified. Similarly, in developmental home settings, the parent or guardian has to be notified. And that is true of any prospective resident. So if somebody is looking to move into a particular group home, the guardian or parents have to be notified as well that someone there is either presumed to be positive or is positive. That is as far as we know, the extent of the mandate from DDD to notify anybody. So we've asked this question. I know I have asked this question of DDD leadership, and that is the answer that I've gotten time after time. In the same way that the Department of Health Services does not want to release information on nursing home facilities, and there was a big article in the Arizona Republic over the weekend about that, and several media outlets around the state are now suing the state to release that information. Neither DDD or DES or DHS want to be specific about the locations where these things are happening. They have their reasons. I won't go into them right now. I don't particularly find them justified, but they have made it clear to the extent to which those things do have to be reported.
Thank you, John. And that's a good start. But like I said, when I know staff that are working with my daughter are working in group homes also, or other IDLAs, you know, that doesn't help me, you know, to even think about a timeline for transitioning my daughter back. I mean, she's ready to go back, and I just can't picture it right now because there's so many unanswered questions, you know, and unknowns for, you know. So again, it's an awkward question, but I think, you know, just putting the information out there. I know you can't make people do that, but it would be helpful to family members to help us wrap our brain around this, and, you know, if and when our children, our adult children, you know, can move back to their IDLAs.
Natalie, this is Erica. Can I ask a question?
Yes.
So what would be the best way to get information to you all, as a family member? Is it through email? Is it through phone call? Like, what would be the best method to get that information to you on? Like, if for example, if some of the agencies started doing weekly updates for families and individuals, what would work?
And I think it's different, if you're asking me, Erica, I think it's different for every family, but I religiously read my emails and try and see what's happening, and yeah, I think emails, when it's very close to home, I think agencies need to be picking up the phone and letting family members know.
Mhm.
And maybe even mail for some people, a notification would work for other family members.
Okay.
Thank you for answering.
Kathy,
that.
this is,
Go ahead, John.
sorry, this is John again from the ARC. And just to maybe add a further suggestion, it's been my experience that providers themselves around the state are doing as fine a job as they possibly can communicating with the families they serve, or the families of the individuals they serve. And so both you, Kathy, and anyone else on the call who's having difficulty finding out the status of things, I would just recommend that you stay in close communication with the providers who serve your family member or loved one. They really are trying their hardest to make sure that everyone stays informed. There are some limitations because they too are relying upon information that's provided by the state or federal government. But I have not come across a single one yet that has tried to withhold information or obfuscate. They really are trying to make sure that people stay as informed as they can be.
Okay, thank you, John.
Thank you, John. So we've got just a little bit time left. I'll just go through a few more questions, and then we have one question that we wanted to ask everybody before we end today's call. So Shana says, contact your support coordinator. I think that's a very wise idea. A lot of families do not have access or do not know how to use email. And that is also true. So Erica, I don't know if there's any, Erica asked the question, what is the best way? So I don't know if anybody has some ideas on that, especially when we're trying to maintain social distancing right now. And Shana says that she has families text her all the time. And Karen also writes that they're also calling families. So, so I think in any way possible, any avenue in trying to outreach to is going to be the best way right now. Even if it may be if you have to go to their place and drop off a letter or a flyer at their front door. I've heard of a few instances of that. So Shane Ellis is right. SCs are supposed to be calling all families in every couple of weeks.
Natalie, I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
And also, Ken did say I didn't receive any updates from my support coordinator at all. I got all updates from meetings like these. But here's my question. How do families know that they're supposed to have their support coordinators calling them every few weeks? Is there some notification from DDD? Because families don't know that that is expected unless somebody tells them. So they wouldn't know that they're not getting the information. And it really does depend on the support coordinator. That's the issue. And support coordinators only have so much information. A lot of it comes from the top. Well, we're stuck in an information vacuum sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
We are.
Nobody knows the answer right now. Everybody's trying to work on it.
Yeah, and I think a lot of things to remember during our sessions is that, there's, as Erica said, we all don't have the answers. We're learning day by day. So if we can all share with each other, which is part of the reason for these calls, the better. So the last question, as we're getting close to time here. So what are some things you are already doing to maintain your sanity at home that others might learn from? You know, we had this discussion yesterday as we were talking about this call. You know, what are you doing? What are you doing just to kind of make it some sort of normalcy, for lack of a better word? And we'd love to hear your ideas. We'd also, you know, try to put some of these ideas in our Google document. So you can go ahead and raise your hands or put it in the chat. As Michelle says, sanity at home. Sarah Ann writes she got a new pet. Did you get a cat or a dog? Or something else that's not a cat or a dog? Rats. Okay. Liz says take a shower and get dressed every morning, and I hear you on that one. Michelle Stokes, she has 3 canine co-workers. Ken writes, I got a betta fish for my son. Carolyn writes, 1 day at a time. Just so true. And a couple things going back to Erica's point. Karen writes, so true, Erica. As a parent, I have not heard from my support coordinator other than the usual 90-day. It is very hard. My family's texting me anywhere from daily to weekly, which is great. Shana writes, well, that's crazy. Nothing has gone back to normal. All extra DDD services I am extending until the end of summer. Carmen writes, maintaining routine for adult son. I go outside in the early hours to feel the cool air and hear the quietness. Karen writes, I am spending time in my garden, watering and cleaning up, very peaceful. Lucy writes, Animal Crossing. If you're not familiar, Animal Crossing is a game that my daughter's obsessed with. Betty writes, I read for an escape. Barbara Kingsolver at the present. She's a great writer and she's from Tucson, so yay. Annette Yazzie writes, listening to music, I discovered a wonderful band called Fleetwood Mac and REO Speedwagon. I'm glad you're catching up with the modern music, Annette, so thank you. And Stevie Nicks is from Scottsdale, so I'll throw in that plug. Vicky Barber writes, I drop off cabin fever fun activities to our residential homes weekly. Thank you for doing that. John writes, the music of my youth. I will not go there. Liz writes, I also went back to school. Downtime is great. Time to learn something new. Heather writes, going for a drive and enjoying seeing the beautiful countryside. Erica McFadden, Kelly, is there any way we can share those ideas virtually? And I'm going to say I myself been having lots of Netflix marathons. So right now I'm currently in Parks and Recreation. And if you want something to laugh and have a couple hours of just funny writing and great cast, I highly recommend Parks and Rec. Marianne's continuing to run and work our DTA. Shana writes, I'm just working the Netflix. Betty, oh yeah, Netflix, Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee. That's also a great show. It's good, and there's plenty of episodes. John McDermott, treat yourself. Thank you very much. So it's great. It's great to see that everybody's got some things that they're doing, and also bringing to their loved ones and or clients or people that they serve. Hallmark movies, marathons, dropping off small gifts for friends and people at church. Legos. Legos are, especially I think if you, well, not just small kids, big kids of all ages love Legos. So these are great. Again, thank you so much. If there's any more information in relating to anything we talked about today, please email Sarah or myself or anybody that's here on the panel. We'd be happy to put it on our Google Docs. And I do believe if there's not any more questions or comments, I may send it over to Sarah. Sarah, are you still there?
Oh, now I'm unmuted.
Okay.
All right, thank you everyone for another great session today. We want to share with you that, or as a reminder, we are going to be doing another survey, probably similar to the one we sent out this week, because we want to check in about a month or so and compare your responses. We are going to be sharing the results from the survey, so thank you for participating. We will definitely be updating that shared Google Doc with all of the amazing resources you shared in the chat box. There were a lot today. I love seeing that. And there's some new ones I saw in there, so that's really awesome to hear. If you are having issues getting communications from any of the entities that we talked about today, please reach out to someone. Here at the Arizona Developmental Disability Network, we spend all day communicating with these entities. So we have a pretty good track record if you're having problems getting some information. So we want to be a resource for you. And that's really all I have to say as we wrap up. Thank you again, everybody. And have a great rest of your week. Have a great holiday weekend. Happy Memorial Day.